Welcome to Confronting the Line, where we explore the world of personal development and examine the sometimes blurry line between transformation and exploitation. My name is Mark Tafoya, and I'm here with our host, Ann L. Peterson, author of the book, Is This a Cult?, which has recently made shockwaves in the personal development sphere. Hi, Ann.
Hi, Mark. Thank you very much for being here. I'm excited for today's conversation. Let's get to it.
We have a bit of an announcement first, yes? Do you want to share kind of the news that's happening in the world?
Yeah, I just very briefly want to address some communications that have gone around in the last 24 hours from Kevin Harmon, the new center's operation. I don't know what his actual title is, but taking over for Joan Rosenberg and running the centers. And he's been a center's division director for many years, including my own husband, center's division director. We know Kevin well, but he's been on a number of calls, it's my understanding, telling people that they, being Landmark, have attempted to talk with Brian and I and reach out for comment, and that they're telling people that they're reaching out and we're refusing to respond. And I just want to be clear that that's not true. Kevin has had Dave and mine's phone number for the better part of 30 years. None of my emails have changed. There has been no reaching out beyond a very cordial email from Harry that was about reminding me about my proprietary materials agreements and so forth. And I'll share about this in greater detail in a separate podcast, but I just wanted to right now just debunk that lie. And the only commentary I have about it is it actually surprises me how much it's still kind of heartbreaking every time the organization whose one of their fundamental values is integrity, like just lies, like just straight lies. I understand lies from, I don't know, being inside of a particular mindset or whatnot, but just to straight up lie about something is always a little bit disappointing. So just wanted to let folks know that is not true. Brian Nord, Eric Rojas, nor I have heard from anybody inside the Landmark apparatus. And for the record, Landmark folks, Kevin, if you're listening, I've talked with my friends over a little bit culty, Sarah and Nippy, as well as Glenn and Jean at Seek Safely. And they have offered, if you would ever like to come on and join the public discourse and join the conversation and tell us about what's going on at Landmark and respond to any of the criticisms or evaluations, they are ready to host and, of course, be fair and would be excited to do that. And I'll come too. If you want to have a conversation, I'm here.
So thank you, Ann. Today, we are really excited to speak with our guest. Ed Gurowitz is a PhD. Ed is a psychologist who first did the EST training all the way back in 1978. And then he went on to be on staff with Werner Erhard's office. And Ed did traveling and working directly with Werner, including the project to recreate the training, which eventually resulted in the creation of what became the Forum, and then later the Landmark Forum. Ed also worked at Tekniko until he left the network in 1991. And since then, he's been doing transformational consulting work and coaching with executives. And he's written a forthcoming book on personal and organizational transformation. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Good to see you. Thank you, Ann.
Yeah, you're welcome. Well, I want to just give a little bit of framing. I was so excited when Ed reached out to me because, as I wrote in my book, I dealt with in my book sort of the particular experience I had from 2012 until really up till now. I mean, up till when I wrote the book in 2023. And but one of the exciting things that's happened since my book came out is a lot of people are reaching out to me who have read it and are filling me in on the history. And I would say my own history as a facilitator and leader in personal and professional transformational work, consulting, coaching, teaching, training. I also develop content. And so it's been really exciting for me to get to know the folks whose shoulders I stand on, truly. And inside of that, I'm also learning a lot of the true story. I've come to understand that the story that I was told, or the parts of the story as a Landmark leader, the corporate Q&A, if you will, and even as somebody who then went on to host and promote Werner's work in the world, was very, I call it Werner washed. It's one side of the story, one side of things. And a lot has been very deliberately suppressed. It's a lot of the things that I found shocking in 2020 when some of Werner's aides came to me and asked for support as they were being physically abused and their pay being stolen from them. That's the core thing, if you haven't read my book yet. But to find out that all that happened before, like for reals. And it's out there. It's in newspaper articles, it's in books and all this stuff. And despite even having done searches on Werner and that history when I was, promoting his little mini comeback tour, I didn't find it. It didn't come up. The book Outrageous Betrayal did not come up, which is amazing. And if you Google books about Werner now, it'll come right up. So I found that really fascinating. And I've since learned that there's a whole team whose job is to do everything they can with all the tools available to suppress a lot of that news anyway. So anyway, I believe that our history is really important. And for those of us that are passionate about the field of personal development, understanding the evolution of that field, the work, the various works, where they came from, how did we get here today? That's going to be the focus of our first few episodes here, Mark. And then we're going to have Ed back and, be talking a few times, getting into where we're going. But today's really about, wow, let's learn about the real history or the whole history. I think I don't want to say real like the other's unreal. And it matters. It shapes us. It teaches us. And I'm committed to a safer and healthier and more ethical field of personal development. And I want to know the history so I can learn the good, the bad, and the ugly, so we can do it better. And we can continue to evolve the body of work. And Ed is integral to that. So Ed, I actually am just going to invite you to start kind of like you did when you and I first talked. Tell us a little bit about you, who you were, who you were professionally, where you were at. Kind of give us a picture of, 1978, I believe you said, is when you did the S training. And so tell us a little bit about who you were and that, and then how you found your way to the S training. So we'll start there.
Okay. Thanks. Well, as Mark said, I'm a psychologist by training. My original training, my PhD, was in what's today called neuropsychology. At that time was called brain research or physiological psychology. I'd done work on memory and wrote a book on that. And in the early 70s, I, for a variety of reasons, changed fields and went into clinical psychology and got trained in transactional analysis, Gestalt therapy, bioenergetics, a few other family therapy, and was practicing. I was working for New York State in hospitals. I was chief psychologist at Queens Children's Hospital, and then moved to Vermont, where I was in private practice. I was also doing it. It's funny. Going back, there were things called growth centers. Esalen still exists. It was the most famous, but there were a lot of smaller ones, some of which are still around. And a friend of mine, Jack Canfield, before he discovered chicken soup, ran a growth center in Amherst, Massachusetts. And I would go there and I would both participate in workshops and also lead workshops. And people would say to me, when I led workshops, people would say, "Oh, you must have done the S training," which I'd never heard of.
Right.
I said, "Why do you say that?" "Well, you do be, do, have, and you do all this other stuff." Well, yeah, that all came from various sources like Buddhism and whatever. But I was intrigued. And as it happened, there was a man on the board of the International Transactional Analysis Association, of which I was on the board as well. And that fellow, who's now passed on, his name was Herb Hampshire, was also on the board of the EST Foundation, which was the nonprofit foundation that Werner had set up for reasons that are unclear to me. But Herb wanted to bring Werner to the Transactional Analysis Conference, the annual conference in Montreal. And I happened to be in charge of that conference, so he came to me about it. And I basically said, "I don't think anybody takes this guy seriously, but, it's your reputation. If you want to bring him, you can bring him." And he did a couple of hours on EST and psychotherapy. And then he had those of us in the leadership of the organization for a private luncheon. And I was very taken with the man. He's very charismatic.
Yes.
And when he literally went around that lunch, there must have been 12 or 14 of us there, in addition to him and a couple of his people. And he went around and sat and talked with each of us individually, one-on-one. And for those 10 minutes or so, it was like I was the only one in the room. I was very, very taken with him and fascinated with what he was doing. So after that, Herb offered me the opportunity to do he said Werner was doing a special training, invitation only, in New York for 500 people. And did I want to do it? And I said, I'll do it.
I just want to comment. It was so interesting as you were just telling the story about that luncheon. We're going to have Carrie Granger on in the future, and I wrote a little bit about it in my book, but she talks about the first time he came when we were starting this Being a Leader in the Effective Exercise of Leadership project. It was all about developing this course to give away to academia, blah, blah, blah. But what it was really about, I mean, I would come to see very clearly what I was hosting was really about not just reviving Werner but his reputation, and really, he's been seeking, as have all personal development leaders of all sorts, have been seeking that validation in the academic field. Always, they all have some version of it, from L. Ron Hubbard to Keith Raniere to Werner, like all of them, Tony Robbins. I mean, all of them. And but the luncheon you just described is virtually identical to a luncheon that Carrie hosted at the Air Force Academy, because she was one of the very first academics that was going to be helping to bring that work into academia by leading it at the Air Force Academy, which of course is a very prestigious organization in terms of leadership development, but literally like right down to 12 to 13 people. Werner going around to each one, right? So, it's a solid, that was probably in like 2010 or so. Anyway, that was just a little spooky how totally exact that scene you painted was. I find that interesting.
It was a thing. That was planned.
It's a strategy.
Not a coincidence at all, because that was the way those things work.
Yeah. So now, go ahead. Yeah. So take us back to, so they're going to do an S training then?
It was an S training. This is how it was presented to me. An S training, invitation only, 500 people in New York. Now, the invitation didn't mean you didn't pay for it. You paid for it.
Right.
In those days, I can't remember what it was. It was, I don't remember, probably $300, something like that.
Exclusivity. It's a long, age-old sales tactic. Yeah.
Right. Well, you'll see. So two things happened. One, I said to her, I will do the training if you promise that I will then have a personal relationship with Werner. Now, little did I know that was something everyone was promised out of the training.
Oh, really?
And it wasn't a personal relationship like you're going to go to lunch with the guy. It was a personal relationship like in your soul. So yes. I stumbled across that particular buzzword, and Herb, who was a great guy, very honest guy, looked me right in the eye and said, I guarantee it, because that was one of the promises in the training. Well, I got to the training, 500 people at the Hotel Pennsylvania, across from Penn Station, immortalized by Glenn Miller in the song Pennsylvania 6-5000. And there were, the usual thing that people have talked about, the very clear organization of the thing, take the frontmost, centermost, C, etc. And I was sitting next to a young woman. We got to talking before the training started. And she was a policewoman and had not been there by invitation. She was there by registration, just like turned out about half the people there were there by open registration.
Yeah.
So that was my first experience of, in a very small way, being lied to.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyhow, I did the work. I did the
And
training.
Ed, question on that. So when you say open registration, do you mean that somehow someone invited them and like they were a friend
I
of a
don't know
friend, that
how
kind
she
of thing?
got there, but it was a matter of through the New York Area Center, the same way it would be for any training.
Anybody today. So
Yeah,
it wasn't,
as
it
opposed to this
wasn't
exclusive invite. Yeah.
so it
Exactly
wasn't a
right.
training that was just for those in the field of psychotherapy. Line number one, it wasn't exclusive by invitation only. Line number two,
Right.
and it
And
wasn't
there were people there by invitation.
and
There was a famous actress. I'm not going to name names.
sure.
There was the founder and publisher of one of the first LGBTQ, in those days we just said gay, newspapers in New York called The Guardian. So there were people that were there by invitation for sure. Anyhow,
So
so I
how
did the
was it?
training. I lived in Vermont. It was great. It was wonderful. I have done an awful lot of stuff, trained in an awful lot of disciplines. And this was certainly, it was a life-changing experience. It was a transformative experience.
Yeah.
So the nearest place for me to participate was Boston. So I started almost immediately, went into a program to lead what were then called guest seminars, which were little in people's homes. They called them coffee hours, where you go present about the training to people who hadn't done it and see if you can get them to register.
The more recent version, they call them home introductions or homes.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating
And
to
then
call it a coffee. What did you
similar
say? It's called a
coffee hours.
coffee hour. They should have kept that part. That makes it more exciting.
Well, but there were also small, guest seminars attached to graduate seminars. There were guest seminars attached to parts of the training, etc. So I went into training to lead those. I'd travel every Friday 4 hours, drive down to Boston, sit on the phone for several hours, calling people to get them to do the training. And I remember the week closed at 6 p.m. on Friday. That was where they, said the end was the end of the registration week, and anything after that went into the following week. So there was a lot of pressure on Friday afternoons. We called it 2 by 6, enroll 2 more people by 6 o'clock.
They moved it forward eventually to 3 o'clock. And I mean, there are literally former staff members in therapy because they still can't get through a Friday without panic. Because I've talked to them. They've said that's one of the stories that had me start to realize, like, what they're joking, we're kind of calling post-traumatic staff syndrome. But one of the symptoms,
it was a boiler room. It was absolutely a boiler room. Yeah.
Yeah.
So then we'd have a classroom in the evening, and I'd stay for the weekend and do whatever we did. I went on from there. There were and are what were called graduate seminars. And I went on from there, from being a guest seminar leader to being a graduate seminar leader, first in Boston. And from there in 1981, moved to the West Coast with an offer to work in Werner's office.
So I want to pause here for just a moment, because I'd like your reflections, knowing we can't always get back in the mindset of then, we're colored by now, but as a psychologist, as a trained in that field, what was your take on the S training at that time? From that perspective.
I thought it was very powerful. I certainly had no qualms. I mean, I had everybody in my family, my practice in Vermont. There was one guy wouldn't do it. He was going to hold out forever, probably still has. But I got people around me to do it, plus people who had already done it, who heard that I was in Burlington, came to see me and formed a small community there, went to Montreal as well and did stuff there. And it was because I felt that it was tremendously effective.
Effective for what?
The bring guests part of it. You know, the what do I want to say? The presentation of it was that sharing your experience is integral to the experience. That how you keep transforming, how you keep transformation alive is by sharing it. And there's some truth to that.
Sure. Yeah.
However, the dark side of it was get people to do the training.
Yes.
To pay the money and do the training. And for example, as a guest seminar leader, I was rated based on the percentage of people who came to these coffee hours and guest seminars who were enrolled. As a seminar leader, I was rated by how effective I was at getting people in the seminar to bring guests to each session, and they would then do a guest seminar.
Yeah. So, Mark,
and we're all nodding in agreement about that because they've continued to do it that way. Yeah.
What's funny, Ed, is Mark was in the seminar leader program for a short period up until they told him to change his lifestyle and he told them to fuck off. But that we do swear. We'll put explicit on this, by the way. But it's so funny because one of the things that we were told in the Werner Washed era, right, of Landmark was that it was all different, that it had all been reinvented. And in fact, they're now, they went through, I mean, I've been through at least 4 major reinventions. One of the things Kevin keeps saying about me, I don't know anything about their current reinvention, which is true. I would love for them to tell me, send me a memo. I'll read all about it. But it's so striking how the same that aspect is. And I've always just felt they would solve at least 50% of certainly their public relations problem and the cult part of why they keep getting called a cult long before I asked the question, if they just took the business part out. But what I've come to know, and we'll pick right up with your Werner story, but after I got to know Werner the way I did personally, and then when that ended in 2020, that time, and then I began to study and research, it's always been about registrations, which is all about money and influence. Yeah.
With one exception.
Yeah.
I led forums with Werner, and I did presentations with him. Werner had the worst statistics of anybody who led the program.
What?
As far as yes, he would have no part of it. He would leave the room while we did the pitch for bringing guests.
Yeah.
And the explanation was, well, Werner creates the possibility, and if you can't get people to bring guests in the space that Werner provides, then something's wrong with you.
Oh my
but
God.
he was
so interesting because then there's no accountability to him for producing a result. He's like, well, that's on you guys over there.
Which is another consistent aspect of the pattern, right? So I see patterns, and that's another very consistent. He gets others to do the dirty work, as it were. And this is alive in so many different tendrils, but virtually every aspect of his life. He owns nothing. He's a part of nothing. Anything that could have any accountability or responsibility, he is not attached to, including some current legal actions that are going on related to his abuse. I mean, they've even managed to get him out of that, which actually turns out to be a really good thing, because even if he passes away, those legal actions can go forward and hopefully there can be some restitution. But I digress. So let's go back to 1981. So you now moved to San Francisco. Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Back to your question. I saw my life prior to ever hearing about Werner or the training. My life was about making a difference. That's why I went from brain research to clinical psychology, was because I felt it made more of a difference. Brain research would make a difference in the long run, but people were suffering.
Yeah.
So I wanted to work with people and help them. So when I saw the training, I saw it as an opportunity to make a difference on a major scale, which it was. So I knew almost from the beginning that I wanted to be a trainer.
So pause there for a second. So you know how the piece in my book where a big aspect of my book for me was to help people and myself locate the actual source of the difference that we made, the value we provided. And that because you can hear folks, even in Ed's sharing, he's sharing the same thing that so many of us have been sharing who have been leaders at any level, or even just, volunteers and make a leader. We're there to make a difference. And you did. You absolutely, probably wouldn't be here today. And certainly not in this world and this reality that I live in if it weren't for the difference you made. That is absolutely real.
Yes.
What I keep, I'm going to just keep pounding it home every chance I get for the rest of my life is that the source of that difference is you. It's the Eds, it's the Anns, it's the Marks. And because that's who we are. And you were going to do that with any tool that you could bring your way. Can you hear that, folks? Like any tool.
Yeah. Excuse me for interrupting you, but it's
Yeah, go
very
ahead.
important what you said, the tool.
Yeah.
One of the things I used to tell people in my work is that, every year, millions of people in the United States buy a power drill.
Mm-hmm.
And I would ask them, how many of those people do you think need a power drill? And people would say 10%, 20%. I said, no, it's zero. They need holes. The drill is the tool.
Exactly.
Training, the forum is the tool.
Yeah.
What people need is a transformed relationship to their life, with the agent in their life, not the victim. Well, anyhow, so I went out to California because I had a job in Werner's office, and in Werner's office in those days, there were 2 jobs. Well, 3. There were what were called communicators,
Okay.
which, just what it says, they were the people who took all of his phone.
Yeah, he still has that position. Yeah.
Executive assistants. Okay. Then there was the office that handled all of Werner's correspondence.
Okay.
And answered. He got probably hundreds, thousands of letters, and every one of them got answered with a personal signature.
Yeah.
And then there were what were called directors.
Okay.
And the directors, of which I was one, there were 4 or 5 of us, were responsible for specific areas of Werner's interest. So one of my responsibilities was Werner's relationship with Fernando Flores, who's a very well-known philosopher of language now. And
Heidegger,
he's also
is he also a Heidegger scholar? And
he
I've
certainly
heard that.
knows Heidegger. He was not, I would not, compared to, say, Hubert Dreyfus, who's passed on but was a professor at Berkeley, or Michael Zimmerman, who's a professor at Tulane. Those were Heidegger experts. But, certainly Fernando was familiar with it.
Yeah.
And another of my relationships I was responsible for was his relationship to the trainer body, which was the group of people who led the training.
Yeah. And how many would you say there were at about that time? This is like 1981.
At about that time, there were 45. 40 or 45.
Ed, you're freaking me out.
And its peak, there were 65.
There's always been between like 40 and 55, through all the years, and there was always all these declared emergencies and blah, 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 blah. But that's so interesting that body never really kind of always hung in those numbers. I find that fascinating. Anyway, but let's go. It's not nearly as fascinating as the rest stuff you have.
When a bunch of us left in 1991, there were 65.
Gotcha.
All around the world. When I started in 1981, there were 40 or so, all, is this right? Yeah. I'm not sure. I think all U.S., all American.
Interesting.
And then they brought in a specific class of people from other countries, of trainer candidates.
Would you say, just back to your director responsibilities, because this was my experience, because I had that like light. So as the host of the Being a Leader course, I was managing, in fact, this was This was the thing
Yeah,
Werner
no,
and I got in a big
you
fight
were doing
over.
very much more.
I was doing, yeah, because I was managing the relationships with the academic institutions, with the other colleagues actually as well. Like I used to say, I stood in the middle of like a 7-way or 10-way intersection and kind of made sure nobody killed each other, essentially.
Mhm.
And you know, and that the rep, you know, and that things kept moving towards what we were about, which was introducing ontological approaches into leadership development in academia. That's what we were. That's what I was on that for. And so yeah, so we were constantly this thing about managing relationships. This is a key aspect for certainly for Werner Erhard, but again, it's part of the pattern we'll see with almost all guru, narcissistic, the smart ones type leaders, is that a lot of their momentum and motion comes by tending very closely to the relationships. And as Werner has this thing he says all the time, riding on the coattails, you know, riding the coattails of others. And look, I'm not even bashing that as a strategy, but you know, let's be clear, it's a strategy for something, and you know, for whatever
Well,
that person is
there's a
doing it
history
for.
to that, and there's a history to
Yeah.
that before you
Okay.
got there.
Okay. Tell us.
Because in let's see, I went to in about 1980, 79 or 80. Werner was doing programs for ministers, for clergy that he did with a couple of clergymen that he was had a relationship with, and he called it the Mastery Program.
Yeah.
And then he partnered with a psychiatrist named Bob Shaw from Berkeley.
Right.
Bob's
Okay.
also passed on, I think,
Yeah.
and did a program which I participated in for therapists called Mastery of Psychotherapy.
Interesting.
And there were a number of programs like that.
Gotcha.
He had a relationship with a Harvard psychiatrist named John Mack, who had a very close relationship with. John Mack was a big fan of Werner's. Eventually, it's kind of his reputation was tarnished because he was also a big fan of UFOs,
Well, you know,
which doesn't go over big in Harvard.
would you?
But
What would?
all of that,
Go ahead. Sorry, you
all
finish
of
that.
that was going on for many, many years. Making inroads into academia, making inroads into professional circles, including the ministry,
Yeah.
including psychotherapy, etc. So,
Any field that
as a
he
director,
could leverage for ultimately it's for influence and reputation, which equals registration. I mean, this is
pretty
one
much.
thing, Werner and I, we had dinner, we talked about this. We actually have this very in common. Somebody took me under their wing when I was 20 years old and said, I'm going to teach you sales, because if I teach you sales, you will have a job for the rest of your life and you'll be able to care for your children. Because I had a ninth grade and had to drop out of school in the ninth grade, single mom, teen mom, etc. And yeah, it's like baked in the DNA in a way. And well, I'm curious about, because I know it's sort of the later side, but what would you say Werner's, given you were quite close to him, because I think you were also, you know, sort of almost like a body man. He had he always had somebody, you know, right near him, helping him get ready, you know, move, get from place to place, things like that. So you're very close
Well,
at
he had
that point.
actually two people. He had what were called an aide. That was
Yes,
the other
still
part of the
does, yeah.
office. I forgot. Although they weren't even in the office, they were in
With him,
Werner's home
right?
with him.
Yeah.
They were in the term. My understanding of the term, they were the body men. They pressed his clothes. They made sure he had what he needed. That he you know had
Yeah.
a dime in his pocket to make a phone call, because he
Right.
never carried money.
No, absolutely, absolutely everything, every piece of lint, his eye
Right.
drop, like everything is he's sort of exported OCD, if you will, you know, like it's completely cared. But I'm
Well,
curious, what was his relationship? What do you think as near as you could tell, being close to him and being in the field you were in, what was his real thoughts or relationship to the field of psychiatry and psychology? Because it's quite poo-pooed in the landmark world. And so I'm wondering where that really started.
that's new. That's the poo-pooing
Okay.
it is new.
Okay.
When I was there, he had a lot of respect for it. And in fact, when I was there, one of the first things I did, I was still a director at the time, was I created a program in the training, which carried over into the forum, called Therapist on Call, so that every center had a group of therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers that they could call on for mental health issues and that screened anyone they had a concern about and could say, no, this person doesn't get into the training or the forum. And also they were on call during the weekend. If anything happened in the training or the forum weekend, they would get called and come in and take care of the person.
So they would actually
and was the idea
to the site. Sorry. They would physically come to the site?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Absolutely.
And was the idea behind that it would be there to protect the participants, to really take care of them? Because it seems in later days that's turned into whoever they had on call always felt a little bit more like a CYA kind of thing for the organization.
Oh,
it's like, okay, just in
that's
case,
not how it started.
I mean, I don't think that they don't care, but they definitely had more, because now when my husband was center manager, you called the Landmark Forum leader on call. You didn't call a mental health professional, and you called the legal department and like that. So it was definitely a little more CYA, but there's a whole team of people that are researching and finding all kinds of lawsuits. We haven't found a lot in the EST days, lots of newspaper articles, some people having mental health breakdowns and things like that, but not a few pretty significant suicides or things like that, where people, in terms of participants of EST, there's other issues with the staff. I mean, going all the way to the beginning. I mean, within a year of Werner having a business called, EST and Werner Erhard Associates, the staff is, heart attacks, blah, blah, blah. There's tons of issues with the staff, but health issues and so on. But participants,
and I don't want to downplay this, because there was a big concern for safety. Look, there was a program called the 6-Day that had a 6-day course that had a ropes course, totally manned by volunteers, except for a few staff. We put 100 people through in a week, most of whom had never seen a ropes course. Wow. And the level of even minor injuries was extremely low. And, you take any group of, let's say, 100 people that would be in a training.
Yeah.
You're going to have a certain number of incidents if those people, don't do the training.
Right.
But there was a big concern for safety.
Gotcha.
Anyhow, long about the early 80s, I went out there in 81. By about 83, I traveled to Europe with Werner, went around with him, did all kinds of stuff with him. And around 83, he and other people around him began to realize that the times had evolved beyond the training. The training had a reputation for long hours. My training, every day of my 2 weekends of the training, ended at between 4 and 6 in the morning. Started at 9 or 10. You couldn't go to the bathroom except during breaks, or you could, but you were given a hard time about it. You agreed not to.
That's the whole EST, because there's been, I mean, I watch a lot of reruns these days, and I was watching some sitcom the other day, and they were making jokes about EST.
40.
Yeah. Well, the North Dallas 40, there's that movie for sure. That's the big kind of parody that's really funny. But there's literally, I've seen a Criminal Minds episode that had it in it. Okay. This was with David Spade, a comedy. It's funny. I don't think that those of us, I was born in 1968. I did the Landmark Forum in, I think, 95 or 96. So those of us that are part of these sort of, I would say, later generations of that don't really understand how big of a deal EST was in the United States. Like, it was sort of the Tony Robbins at his height, but even bigger, it seems. Like, it was a big deal, and it was in all kinds of aspects of our culture and thinking. It was made fun of, it was made serious of, it was criticized. It was all of those things, that anything that gets big and famous and deals with our psyche, if you will, it was a huge deal. It made, to me, I say that it is you know, while it's not everything that made up the human potential movement, it was the main, they were the big kids on the block, so to speak, you know.
And it seems like
I,
that
I don't,
going to the bathroom thing was the biggest thing that kind of got stuck in the consciousness of people who never did it. They were like, oh, are you here? I heard you couldn't go to the bathroom. I mean, every form of media, you know, The Americans, this TV show a few years ago, they did a whole thing on it was basically us, and it was that stuff. That was the big joke, right? Oh, you can't go to the bathroom.
Well, by the 80s, because of that sort of reputation, Werner began to realize that if it was going to survive, if it was going to thrive, there needed to be changes made. I think he got tired of being known as a person who won't let anybody go to the bathroom.
Okay, pause.
And right there is the perfect spot for us to take a little pause and to end this episode here. We're going to resume with Ed in our next episode, and we'll get a little more into some of the details of how Ed left the organization, and we'll take some questions from our live studio audience. But for now, thank you so much for joining us. This has been Confronting the Line. Please like and subscribe on YouTube and help us to grow the channel. Please share it with people who also take an interest in the world of personal development, and for all people who want to confront the line between exploitation and transformation. Thank you. My name is Mark Tafoya. We'll see you next time.